What is up, everybody? Today I want to talk about a video I just saw here. We're going to watch it together. In this video, we're going to see a Russian culture and her experiences with Americans. And she's going to talk to this American lady from Seattle that tries to make generalizations about how Americans are and the differences and how she interpreted and received Russian people's culture. And this stuff is absolutely hilarious to me because this lady from Seattle really shows her echo chamber that she's experienced and then trying to generalize that this is how American culture is like, which is utter nonsense and it's bullshit. American culture is not like Seattle. Get out of your echo chamber. Most of Americans do not want piss, shit, and homeless people all over the city of Seattle and having that all over the country. And the reason this caught my interest is because this highlights the cowardice culture of people that we have in America that try to label it as polite and courteous and empathetic and civil. No, that's just you unable to tell the truth and you being too much of a coward to speak up on that. And most Americans are not like that. That's just an echo chamber of people that live in Seattle that are cool with piss and shit and needles being all over the place because you're too much of cowards to say this is wrong, these people should be imprisoned, and I don't want to deal with these kind of people, etc., etc. So, me as an American, I relate more with the Russian lady, and you'll see why. This lady from Seattle is nothing like I've met from people here in Texas. That being said, there definitely is a growing up population of people that are cowards and are constantly being empathetic and compassionate and prioritizing being nice and polite while hiding the truth, unable to see the truth, and are always about this political correctness nonsense. People call it woke. I just call it people that are unable to speak the truth, handle the truth, and are too much cowards to defend the truth and speak it. Let's get to the video here.
Today I want to discuss really interesting subject, the difference between Russian and American mentality. And for discussing this, I invited my American friend Sophia to join me. Since Sophia was born and grew up in USA and I'm on opposite, was born and grew in Russia, I think it would be really interesting to discuss this subject together. What do you think?
Absolutely.
So let's get started.
Everything we say is coming from the perspective of two people, and they're absolutely not representative of the entire country because both Russia and the USA are incredibly diverse. So Dasha is coming from the perspective as a Moscow citizen, whereas I'm coming in as a young American. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and absolutely people from Seattle are not the same as someone, say, from Texas. So everything we say is going to be pretty unique to our own personal perspective of life that we've experienced so far, and just wanted to get that out there.
But I hope that after our discussion you have a better idea of the people in USA and Russia and why we can't make soul friendship between each other. Sophia, you're living around 1 year in Russia, and could you please tell me one of the first things that I noticed that quite different from the USA?
So I think in general, someone coming from the US to Russia, the very first thing they're going to notice is definitely there's a sort of difference in communication you have between a Russian person than you would with an American person. I find Russians to be much more direct than Americans typically are. And I think sometimes, especially if you're in a more mundane context, like in a supermarket or from a waiter, sometimes they can come across as quite rude. And I think this really has to do with the way Russian language is structured. Russian language is very direct, to the point, and blunt, whereas in English you speak with a lot of formality, there's lots of politeness. And I think when a Russian is learning English, they translate in their mind exactly what they say in Russian to English. So it's very, very direct. For example, if you're in a restaurant ordering something, you would say to your waiter, like if you want something, you say like "давайте." But that literally translates to like "give it to me," which in English I think is quite rude to say to a waiter. And I don't think that means a Russian is necessarily rude. It's just the way the language is a bit different than English. And I have to sometimes remind myself of this because sometimes when I'm speaking to a Russian person, sometimes I kind of feel like they're being a bit too too direct, whereas in English, as an American, you try to kind of beat around the bush a little bit to be polite.
From the other side, for Russians, Americans.
Yeah, so here lies the issue. Beat around the bush. Notice these euphemisms that show that people like her are too cowardice to just speak frankly. Now, listen, depending on the context, you don't want to be this belligerent jackass that's highly demanding, has a crazy tonality where you're just angry and very demanding towards a waiter that's trying to serve you a steak, right? Nothing wrong with that. Now, you can smile. You can say thank you. You can say, yes, please give me the steak. Yes, I would like the steak. Give me the steak, smile, and that's not that big of a deal. That's not offensive to say, yes, please, I would like a steak. Please give me the steak. Please give me the steak. I don't understand. And you smile, you give eye contact, you say please and thank you. I don't see anything offensive about saying give me something. There's nothing offensive about that. I'm not sure what this lady means. This American lady says that is too direct and talking about that we should be finessing that. I mean, what other way are we supposed to say that?
Americans seem too much polite, like sometimes it's too much, like that they smile nonstop. And for me, it's kind of, and I think for most Russians, we don't really believe what they're saying because they're so polite, they're so smart, and sometimes for us it seems that it's too much, like a natural smile. And even I sometimes thinking, is this person really mean so? And to be honest, when we just started, like for around 6 months ago, we met each other and you've been so nice to me. And sometimes I had thoughts like, do you really mean so? Like, do you really so nice to me? Like, because you like me as a person, you find me interesting, or you're just being polite?
Yeah, so here lies, again, the lack of being genuine. People, the Russian lady points out that Americans come off as disingenuous, passive-aggressive, and unable to just speak how they feel, right? If you don't want to hang out, if you don't like somebody, if you disagree with somebody, speak your mind. This whole thing of, oh, I don't want to offend anybody. America is going through this current era of no one wants to be offensive, full of cowards, full of weak, privileged Americans that are all a bunch of snowflakes that are hyper into whatever feels right is right. No one wants to be uncomfortable. And this is a generational thing, okay? Millennials and Gen Z. Obviously, this lady on the left is a millennial or Gen Z. Millennial Gen Z has an issue with this. Why? One, they're constantly on social media, never being out socializing, giving eye contact, doing public speaking things. The whole dynamic of how we communicate has changed. Therefore, we've become ultra sensitive and weak on even being able to handle humor, banter, sarcasm, satire, being able to communicate directly and not waste people's time, respecting people's time by being honest and direct. That's what I appreciate with the Russian culture. Americans waste people's time to not be offensive, which is disrespectful as hell. And people like that, I don't want to be around. I don't give a damn if you being polite and the good intentions of you not wanting to hurt my feelings. No one wants, the nation doesn't benefit when everyone's all hiding away and beating around the bush. We don't have time for that. It's disrespectful and wasting people's time. So this lady bragging about saying, oh, beating around the bush is polite. No, it's not polite. It's disrespectful. You're wasting people's time. Stop bullshitting people and stop embracing lying to people and framing it as, oh, it's polite and I don't want to hurt their feelings.
I think in general, an American prefers to avoid conflict, whereas in Russia, you're much more direct. Like if you have a problem with something, you're going to say you have a problem. For example,
this is crazy. In Seattle, Washington, where everyone walks around, like this is a cultural issue in Seattle, San Francisco, where you have piss, shit, homeless people, constant car break-ins. They had the Chaz of it in Seattle where they took over a city And everyone there was just walking around like nothing because they didn't want to be offensive and speak their mind. And they want to be progressive and empathetic and polite. That's a Seattle, Washington liberal progressive mindset. That is not most Americans. That's an issue. That's not nothing you brag about. That's a weakness from a generation. That's not anything you brag about and stay back and not be confrontational. You want to be confrontational when it is proper. Speak your mind. You shouldn't be tolerating disgusting things that are decadent, degenerate. This is why San Francisco, Seattle looks like shithole cities. They tolerate this crap because they want to be empathetic and not be too direct and beat around the bush or don't speak at all. And then they wonder why you can't even park your car in San Francisco. You have certain areas where you have to like leave your car open and put signs on it that say, please don't break in my windshield. I have nothing valuable in this vehicle. That's what you get when you have a cowardice culture like this. This is not American. This is a generational issue with Gen Z and millennials. And it's a new phenomenon. And it's not every millennial or Gen Z. It's just, again, the smartphone, Twitch streaming gamers that are socially awkward as hell, texting nonstop, unable to communicate, unable to speak properly, clearly, succinctly, can't even speak publicly anymore, constantly gazing at your phone 24/7 and scrolling through TikTok and Snapchat and social media, have the shortest attention span. This is a generational issue. It's a problem. It's not America. So this lady talking about confrontation. America was built on confrontation. We confronted the British Empire and fought a war. Rebellion. The Constitution is naturally a confrontational document against the federal government, against tyranny. To be bold and courageous, to speak freely whenever things are wrong. This girl does not represent America at all. The Second Amendment. What kind of persona you have to be able to have a gun and exercise protecting life, liberty, your property, the castle doctrines, etc., etc. You have to be a naturally confrontational person to confront someone breaking into your house, wanting to kill your family. So this whole Americans are naturally not what the fuck are you talking about?
Example, you were mentioning the other day, if a waiter is asking you if you like your food, if you don't like it, you will say you don't like it and give the exact reasons why, whereas I would never even dream of doing that. I know there are some Americans out there that certainly would do it, but none that I know. You would just kind of smile through it, basically, and suffer in silence if you really hate your food. And I think there's something to be said about constructive criticism.
Suffer in silence. Again, there you go. There are suffer in silence, then actually solve the problem and call out. Like if you are in a restaurant and the food sucks, they didn't cook the steak medium rare. They cooked it well done. And you're too much of a coward to speak up about your steak being done incorrectly. What kind of life is that? That is a coward. You are weak. That is not American. That's an issue with you and the people you surround yourself with that cannot speak frankly when they have a problem.
As well, if someone comes up to you in Russia and you ask them, how do I look? Is there anything I should change? A Russian will just say, yes, you look bad and here's why you should change it. Whereas I feel like in English, as an American, maybe even a British person, generally you would try to say something nice and then say what you think they should change and then end it with something nice again. So that overall it's a really positive criticism, basically.
Yeah, I actually noticed it many times. Like for me, sometimes, especially if I don't have time, for me it's better, okay, just tell me what's wrong. I will change it immediately, especially I will probably ask.
This is what you call a shitty ass friend that's not able to speak his mind. If you lie to your homie that's doing something or looks bad, just be frank with them. Okay, the issue is people nowadays, especially Gen Z and millennial, when someone is like, yo, this outfit's not working, it doesn't match, you need to get a haircut, whatever. When you say something like that, the person receiving it should appreciate that, to say, this person's looking out for me. Now, you don't want to say, yo, you're a piece of shit, scumbag, kill yourself. No one speaks like that. There's a line, of course. But to say, yeah, homie, this outfit's not working. This outfit looks rough. You're not looking right. You don't look proper. You need to get a haircut. When's the last time you brushed your teeth? Whatever. Your breath stinks. There's nothing wrong with that. People ought to be this way. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're looking out for the best interest of your friend to make sure that they're going to be not embarrass themselves and look like a fool, that's called looking out for your friends. So this whole lady of like, oh yeah, Americans, they don't, if you look like shit, we just let you go out looking like shit, because we don't want to be offensive, and we want to empower each other through lies. That's the bullshit you hear from Americans. Like Gen Z millennials specifically. The nonstop lying, like hyping each other up. America's culture is destroyed. We have problems and issues to where we can't even have any standards anymore. Standards are offensive. If you're fat, you're fat. There used to be a time where people that were fat kind of embodied them being fat, and they were like, yeah, I'm fat, and they accepted that. And there were nicknames we gave to people. Fat Joe, Big Mike. Big used to mean, can mean a certain context of you being fat. And people will give you the nickname, and you accepted that. And it wasn't a disrespectful thing. It was just everyone accepting the reality that you are fat. You're big. You're out of shape. You're unhealthy. Now, if you want to reject that reality, that's your problem. We have an issue with truth in America currently. The whole men can be women nonsense. The whole that the beauty standard of America being skinny is offensive and patriotic. There's so much nonsense of Americans trying to protect lies. And this lady that's quote unquote representing American culture is the issue. She does not represent America at all. She represents the weakest form of Americans that are coming up from her generation. The weakest that will destroy this country because she's not comfortable with the truth at all. She'd rather be polite and considerate and empathetic than fix problems and actually get things done.
Ask only the person I like about their opinion, and if they don't like, I would better change it fast, and then we'll be looking good. For example, I would prefer that my friend tell me that I have something in my teeth and not going all day with this just because he's not shy and just tell me directly about this. But sometimes I feel like some people, especially Americans, they might be quite shy about this and they will just won't say anything.
But see, sometimes I feel like Russians are too much. Like sometimes it's completely unsolicited, basically. Mm-hmm. So even without you asking, they tell you what they think is wrong. So sometimes like a Russian person, like maybe a babushka or something, they'll come up to you and be like, oh, you look kind of fat right now.
This is kind of weird thing, like my parents have it, my mom have it sometimes, and I'm like trying to teach her like, okay, that's something you shouldn't tell before I'm asking you about this. But yeah, this is more Soviet stuff. Like I would say young people, they're not like that anymore.
There's definitely a difference in mentality between someone who lived in the Soviet Union versus the younger generation in Russia, for sure.
Do you find Russians being rude?
A loaded question. I think, okay, so if I was coming into Russia as someone who knew nothing about Russians, I would say yes. Mm-hmm. But now I know Russians, I know how they act, I know how the language is structured generally, so I will say no. In general, Russians are not rude. They are just very direct and upfront with exactly what they want to say.
We all know that Russians are much less smarter than Americans. And how do you feel about this? Are Russians that cold as everybody think?
I think when you come across a Russian on the street, they're going to be quite a bit colder than American would be to you. Meeting an American on the street in the US, you're going to have a really good conversation with them, more likely than not. They're really happy to talk to you, they're smiling a lot with you, very polite, and it's not really a similar experience in Russia. It's a bit faster, a bit colder. But I think after this first stage of meeting a Russian, getting through their cold exterior, once you get to know them, they actually become a really warm person.
The most important thing is to break the ice with Russians. once you break it, they become the most friendly people you might know. And also Russians are really welcome to invite to their home. They will bring you the best food that they have in house. And this is true. For example, Sophia just been in my parents' house for like 5 minutes, and 6 months after, my parents still asking me about her, like if she needs anything. And also my granddad wanted to bring her salads. It was on New Year's. The next day he wanted to bring her salads to try Russian food. So I would say that Russian might seem cold on the street. That's what we, I think, agree with each other. But once you break the ice, super friendly people.
There's this feeling of formality. Like there's a difference in formality when you first meet someone between the US and Russia. Yeah, so just to reiterate, Americans are much more polite and friendly to begin with, while Russians are a bit more standoffish.
Yeah, but later on, trust me, Russians gonna be your best friends.
All right, so whenever she says polite, basically Americans bullshit and act nice and smile while not being honest at all, okay? Now, of course, we want to be civil. We want to say hello. We want to be social. There is nothing wrong with that. The Russian side, if what she says is true, where they're just cold, listen, if you go to New York and people are going to fucking work, they don't want to say hello and smile. People are not smiling in New York City when they're on a rush. Everyone's going somewhere. Everyone's in a grumpy mood. So it's here in America as well. And I'm sure in Russia it's like that as well. Not everyone's exactly the same. The whole generalization and Americans are naturally very polite. I would say, yes, that's true. Americans are naturally more social, more open to meeting someone random. There are certain cultures like China, Japan, and Russia where it's less common to randomly spark a conversation with a stranger. It's less common. Here in America, we're so courageous and so adventurous that we want to spark conversation with people. We want to get out there. That is, I think, an American trait. That's great, where people are more open-minded to just having a random-ass conversation. That's great. I think culturally speaking, if it's what she said is true about Russia being cold to randomly meeting people and random discussions with random strangers, I would not prefer that. That being said, though, this whole thing of being overly polite and just, there's a line to it. If you're just talking and doing this small talk nonsense that some people don't appreciate small talk. For me, I'm always trying to laugh, trying to have fun, trying to be light and enjoy life because life is so short. Every minute is valuable. And I just like to bust people's balls at times, joke, always trying to laugh. That's great. I think American culture, we're always, that's the benefit of American culture is we're so outgoing and adventurous and brash for humor purposes that it makes us naturally more open-minded to being able to enjoy the moment and stuff like that. I think that's the beautiful thing about small talk. Me being a natural extrovert, I'm always trying to laugh. I'm always trying to break the ice of humor and laughter and not be so, trying to find what to get offensive or angry about. Like some people are like that here in this nation where you can't even make a joke anymore. They're just miserable, overly offensive, very sensitive. And I just, it's a bunch of nonsense. But, I would have to agree with the lady here saying that Americans generally are more social. They're naturally more gregarious and outgoing than some other cultures.
I would also want to share some of my thoughts because from all the Americans that I know, because I studied in England, I studied in Austria, and I traveled a lot, so I met a lot of Americans along the way. And from what I noticed, I wouldn't make plans with Americans because I had few stories to tell. Shortly speaking, I met this amazing group of girls from America. We met in Greece. We started making plans, and they started, please join us to the trip tomorrow. Everything will be fine. Like, we would love you to join. So I said, yes, sure. And then they canceled 10 minutes before the meeting. And this is, I found super rude, and I felt.
So here is the whole flaw of being polite, like the lady on the American representative that we have here, where it's so disingenuous politeness that it's just lying. You're lying with a smile. You're politely lying. And in making these false promises to not offend the other person. This is the stuff where I can't stand this culture. This is very common, especially in West Coast. When I lived in California, people there were super flaky, non-stop lying. Did no honor of the word. Everything was just like you say something in the moment, and it was like you say it just to create a bond, a superficial fake bond in the moment to make these plans, and then nothing happens. This is nonsense that you typically have with, I will say frankly, with liberals and progressives. Typically, especially in California. And the reason for this is because, again, the common denominator you're going to notice is they're too cowardly to offend you. So they rather lie to your face and be able to flake on you that way instead of being, direct and honest with you to your face to say, I don't have time, make these false promises and false plans. This is the nonsense that is not good American culture. Only a select few locations are like that. And that is a value that is destructive and catastrophic. In America, the people that I get along with are people that their word is their life. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. And I understand things happen and you can correct yourself. So if you make a promise and you say, oh, something came up, then correct yourself and cancel the plans. There's so many instances where they make these plans. You think the plans are going to be true and you show up and then they flake on you last minute. This lack of respect of people's time is disgusting American culture. This, in the name of being polite, in the name of not hurting your feelings, get the fuck out of here with that pussy ass shit. I can't stand people like that. I cannot stand people like that. And this Russian lady illustrated that. Made these plans with Americans. They made all these plans. And it all sounded great at the moment. And what happened? Flaked out.
Faced with these few times already that Americans, they really can cancel just in front and they will say something polite. Probably I talked with another American friend of mine. He told me that they're really shy to tell in the beginning. So they give you like false signs that yes, we're gonna meet. But in the end, they
lie to you. It's called lying.
I'm so guilty of this.
This is not. Look at her smile. I'm so guilty of this laughing. This is not funny. You're dealing with people's time. If you don't respect people's time, you're not a respectable person. This is not funny at all. Why is she laughing? This is disgusting.
So guilty of this. Even if I really don't want to meet someone, I'll be like, yeah, let's hang out. And then we never hang out. But to be honest, I think you've just gotten quite unlucky with the Americans you've met abroad, because generally with my experience meeting other Americans, maybe it's because I'm American, if you meet a fellow American abroad, you can be friends really easily.
But we met just a guy 2 days ago on the street.
Why would you want to be friends with someone that lies to your fucking face? She just laughed and said, oh, I do the same thing where I flake out on it all the time. Yeah, it's so funny. Bitch, you are not worthy of respect or worth anybody's time. You are the problem with our nation.
Yeah, and I think that's just an unlucky occurrence.
So many people really like it. I don't know. For example, in Russia, when you're making plans,
this is embarrassing that this lady is like bragging about flaking and lying to people. It's disgusting. America is going through a moral decay. No values. Everything's about whatever feels good in the moment and trashing any type of values and virtues that we used to have. This lady does not represent what America ought to be and what America used to be. She is this new modern phenomenon of the weakest generation known to mankind.
It's very serious because you shouldn't break the plans, or you should tell about this in advance, because otherwise Russians are not going to invite you anywhere. For example, this guy, if he write me again, I will not reply to him anymore, because he just told me after the time we agreed to meet that he wouldn't be able to make it. So it's like nonsense. And I would say that if you make plans with Russians, you for sure go. You will usually say 1 day before that yes, you should meet. And if you can't, it's understandable, but you need to tell about this in advance. And when we are making plans, we truly make plans. It's not like you say, oh yeah, we're gonna meet, and you both know that you're never gonna meet. Because in Russia, in 99% of cases, you're truly gonna meet with each other.
Would you say?
Yeah, basically America has a lying culture. We embrace lying. We embrace dishonesty. That's what the Russian just literally called her out in her face, that this American she's experienced has an issue with dishonesty. No integrity, no honor, no respect.
Say that Americans are a bit too positive for you?
Yes, sometimes it's too much. That's what I mentioned in the beginning, that it might even seem a little bit fake when...
It is fake. And if you're defining positive as like in the moment, you're polite and you make all these plans and it's all bullshit. Yeah, that's what this Russian lady is about to communicate. That's not something to brag about, to where you're so in the moment trying to be polite and nice and hype each other up. And it's all lies.
Like in Russia, I feel the person. I mean, I can understand what he feels, what he thinks, most likely, even if he's polite. But still, I can't understand. With Americans, for me, it's still difficult to get it. What about you? Do you think like Russians are on opposite, like
I think in general, Russians are quite a bit more pessimistic than Americans. This can be contributed to a number of factors, namely the historical context and the political context of the country in the Soviet Union. I sort of feel like Russians, especially when trying to change current events, Russians are a lot more apathetic and pessimistic towards things, and generally their sense of perspective on life is a lot darker than an American's would be. But that's kind of understandable, I think, with the pretty dark history of the Russian
Yeah, exactly.
country.
I would also add here about the level of life, because in USA, level of life it's a little bit higher, maybe even not, let's be honest, not a little
higher,
bit,
yeah.
much higher than in Russia. Especially like I'm from Moscow, it's one level of life. In other cities, completely different situation. So I would say because of this low level of life, that's people becoming darker, pessimistic, and more negative, I would say.
Yes, I will say that my experiences with people in Moscow is quite different than my experiences in other places in Russia and other post-Soviet countries. Moscow is a very first world city. It has every single Western comfort you could possibly imagine, and the people are a lot more positive in Moscow because I think there's a lot more opportunity in Moscow.
Yes,
when you go a couple hours out of Moscow, for example, say to Vladimir, it's a completely different story. People are a lot more negative, quiet, dark, and I also had a similar experience in Moldova, which is a small post-Soviet country.
Continue our subject, I'd also say that many Russians think that Americans create some problems from nothing. And what I mean here, they're like focusing on some, for most Russians, even not a problem, but they sometimes, because one word, they can get offended, they can much more sensible, I would say. Do you agree with me?
Well, I think it has to do a lot with this facade of politeness that Americans exhibit. Russians just punch right through it right away. They go right in with being a little rude sometimes, direct, whereas Americans, you want to kind of not be so direct. But it's just like the way like Russians are, like they're very direct. Like sometimes in public, I think you're quite rude to people.
I am rude. Usually everybody is saying how nice I am.
Well, maybe you're really nice for a Russian, yeah. But sometimes, like for example, when we're checking out or in a restaurant, I'll be very surprised with how exactly you ask for something because it's so direct. Whereas in America, I'd be so nice. I'd be like, I'm so sorry for inconveniencing you. I know you're really busy, but do you think you could get this thing for me? Whereas you're just like, clean the table now.
Yeah, I would say this is already too much, and I would never say clean the table. I always all the time say, could you please clean the table? But what you're saying, that's what I meant about it's too much for me. It's like fake and like.
Okay, so this she just lied about how this Russian lady approaches customers. She says she would never be that direct. She would say, "Do you mind doing this? Would you please doing this?" Already lying. Non-stop lying and exaggeration. Why is this lady even here? I wouldn't take this lady seriously at all. This non-stop lying. This is embarrassing.
Just know, like, if you say this in Russia, people will think like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, right.
After living so long in Russia,
Yeah, the thing about over-polite people is it comes off as that you have an agenda and that you're hiding something. Whenever someone is way too polite, way too over the top of trying to win you over, it's hard to connect with that because it's not real. No one is that overly polite. What do you have to hide?
Difference did you notice more?
One cultural difference that if you're coming to Russia and you're invited to someone's house, you'll notice quite quickly is that in Russia, it is expected for the guest to bring a gift whenever going over to someone's home. In the US, this is maybe something that happens sometimes if you're going over to someone's house for the first time or it's a special event. But I think in Russia, almost every time you go over to someone else's house for dinner, breakfast, anything, you need to bring something. If you don't, it's incredibly rude.
Yeah, I would agree with this. Here I would also add that usually when I'm coming to my best friends, we order something from home. It's not that I like have to bring something to them. And same, they're coming to me. But usually when I'm coming to their home and they're gonna be their parents, I bring something. But really close friends you don't need, but not super close, you bring all the time something, either flowers or mostly it's like candies or like desserts, something like this.
Yeah, at least with my friend groups in the US, whenever we go over to each other's place for dinner or something, we never do this.
Okay, she didn't listen to anything that this Russian lady said. The Russian was very specific. If she's with close friends that are immediate friends, there isn't this formality of needing to bring a present or food. Now in America, if you're going to a somewhat stranger of a house for, let's say, a party or maybe a formal event, it is proper for you to bring a dish, food, chips, beverages of some sort to contribute to them hosting and not being a leech. A lot of people call these people leeches, right? They leech off of people and they are definitely looked down upon to where if you go to a formal event or a party and you don't bring anything at all, it is more proper here in America. I've been to multiple different events where, someone that I don't really know, but it's a friend of a friend. I typically ask them, do you want me to bring anything? A drink, a food, whatever. That's the proper thing to do to show, hey, I want to contribute to show appreciation for you having me over at your beautiful house, for you organizing this event, for you entertaining me. It is a form of appreciation and gratitude. I mean, that's just a common sense thing. And we bash people that are constantly never bringing something and they're always leeching. They're drinking other people's beers all the time. They're eating all the food and they're just there like a bum leeching off of people. In American culture, it is frowned upon to do that. So I'm not sure what this lady is talking about. Again, this is a terrible representation of the stereotypical Gen Z millennial got people they don't have any type of formality of any sort. Everything is so loosey goosey, do whatever you want, no rules, no regulation, no standards, no nothing. Just do whatever the hell you want. This is again a group of people that act and think this way in America. It's not the majority though.
Yeah, I would say that it's also common if you invite for the dinner to bring a dessert or cake. I think yes, never go to a Russian place without some gifts. And the last thing that I would like to discuss is propaganda in the TV. Because in Russia, like basically what everybody's saying, and I know guys, there are a lot of Americans watching me, that's not what I mean, but Russians think that Americans are stupid. And on the other hand, I would say in American TVs, like all the movies, Russians are all the time evils, all the time bad guys that sometimes it's already kind of getting annoying. What do you think about this?
Well, yeah, I think it's definitely media perspective. Because I completely disagree. Americans are in general not stupid. Of course, America is a huge country, over 300 million people, so of course there's stupid people. But on a whole, most people are quite reasonable. I think a lot of people are very intelligent. And you know what? Russia's also filled with some really stupid people.
Yes,
also.
That's true.
Exactly. But you're completely correct. In American media, for example, we're all watching Stranger Things at the moment. Russians are the villains. And this is true for so many movies, so many TV shows, so many books, that if you have a Russian accent, people kind of just think, oh, we've got a villain on our hands here.
Yeah, like for me, it's already, to be honest, getting annoying all the time watching movies with like Russians all the time, bad guys, because our country is huge and it's full of super smart.
And the reason for that nonstop propaganda against Russian, I strongly disagree with the propaganda making Russians look bad. But there's a reason for that. Let's be honest. If you're someone that is somewhat into studying of politics and the military industrial complex and NATO and all this nonsense, they have to demonize and character assassinate the Russian country because, again, there's a lot of financial interest in war, a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of land that wants to be taken over, the whole Ukraine stuff. It's a bunch of nonsense. Okay, it's a bunch of nonsense. Propaganda in America is probably the most aggressive out of any propaganda in the world because it is called manufactured consent. So where you create a false reality to then justify doing something to easily get the consent of Americans, right? So you demonize Putin and he's the devil and Russia is the next Hitler. Russia's doing genocide because of Putin and Russian this and Putin that, etc., etc., without us being able to truly know the full context. We're only getting one side of the story. And then Americans get brainwashed into justifying us sending billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine and assume it's all honest and ethical and there's nothing conniving and corrupt going on here, right? Americans get lied to nonstop by politicians and the media. 24/7 is the most disingenuous, dishonest media that's disgusting, that has lost all credibility in my eyes and is losing credibility in the vast majority of Americans' eyes. The mainstream media is what I'm talking about.
People who, by the way, come into USA for working because that's where you get more money usually than in Russia. But I would say that Russians also might think about this because what we mentioned in the beginning, that focusing on small things. Like, because for us it can be like, why you even think about this so much? Why you're so offended that fast? Why you think about this small thing? Like, it's nothing. Just go on. Like, don't focus on that. So maybe it's also connected to this, but we discussed already why it happened.
Do you think Americans are stupid?
Of course no. Like, I know many Americans people, absolutely nice guys, and no way like I would think, because again, country is huge and Russia is huge, and I also think that there are many stupid people in Russia.
Stupidity is universal.
That's true. So guys, I think this is already the end of the video.
Yeah, like it's stupid to lie to people and waste people's time and call it being polite and beating around the bush and make this Russian, like, exaggerate this Russian lady's point that, you know, Americans aren't as formal in bringing of the food. This stuff is disgusting, man. This has to stop. You know, the reason I even have this channel is to point out that this culture and the direction we're heading to right now is abhorrent. It is destructive. It is catastrophic, and we have to reverse it. We can't have a nation that normalizes lying. We can't have a nation that's too cowardice to speak for the truth. We can't have a nation that is overly tolerant. I forgot who made the saying, but tolerance is the last virtue of a dying society. I 100% agree with that. You can't be too tolerant. If you're overly tolerant, then you don't stand for nothing. That's all it means. And that's why you have things like this girl embracing and laughing at, yeah, I flaked out on people. That's disgusting. It's not a laughing matter. That's embarrassing. You don't represent Americans. That's all I got to say about this. You guys take care.